My wife, Vanessa, had a knack for hosting parties that could rival any socialite soiree. Our home, an expansive Victorian with a porch that wrapped around like an embrace, was always filled with laughter, friends, and the aroma of her cooking. Vanessa was magnetic, the kind of woman who could make anyone feel special, and I'd always admired how she seemed to carry the weight of our busy lives so effortlessly. I, on the other hand, was quieter. A data analyst by profession, I thrived in the realm of patterns and logic. Vanessa often teased me for being too serious, but I loved how her energy balanced my more reserved nature. We had 2 daughters, Ella and Sadie, who adored their mother and kept us both busy with their endless school projects and extracurriculars. Life had a rhythm, a cadence that felt stable, even comforting. Our family vacations were filled with silly photos, weekend mornings started with pancake breakfasts, and Vanessa's ability to light up any room made me feel like the luckiest man alive. It started innocently enough. Vanessa mentioned a new friend, Lila, a vibrant, free-spirited woman she'd met at a yoga class. Lila quickly became a fixture in our lives, often stopping by for coffee or joining us for family dinners. She was charming in her own right, with a contagious laugh and an ability to seamlessly blend into any conversation. The girls adored her, and I couldn't deny that she brought a fresh energy to our routines. Vanessa seemed happier, more relaxed, and I welcomed anything that made her feel good. Then, about 6 months after Lila entered the picture, Vanessa announced that she was going to partner with her to run an event planning business. It seemed like the perfect venture for someone with Vanessa's charisma and organizational skills. The two of them spent hours brainstorming themes, visiting venues, and building a client list that grew faster than anyone expected. It wasn't long before Vanessa was busier than ever. Between planning weddings, corporate events, and charity galas, she seemed to be thriving. I was proud of her, even if it meant I had to take on more of the parenting load. But there were moments, small, fleeting moments, when I caught a glimpse of something I couldn't quite put my finger on. A hurried phone call that ended the second I entered the room. I chalked it up to my own overthinking. There was no reason not to trust her. It was a Saturday morning, one of those rare moments when the 4 of us were all home together. Vanessa had been in a rush that week, juggling multiple events, but she'd insisted on making time for a family breakfast. As we sat around the table, Ella mentioned how much fun it had been at Aunt Lila's party. The comment barely registered with me, but Vanessa stiffened slightly, her hand pausing mid-reach for the syrup. "Oh, that was just a work thing," she said quickly, her tone light, brushing past the subject before anyone could linger. It wasn't the first time something like this had happened. Over the past few months, Vanessa's explanations about her time with Lila had grown vaguer, her stories less detailed. She'd always been an open book, but now there were chapters missing, and I couldn't help but notice. Later that day, as I folded laundry, I noticed one of Vanessa's dresses stuffed carelessly into the bottom of the hamper. It was unusual. She was meticulous about her clothes. The hem was torn slightly, and there was a faint smudge of something red near the neckline, too dark to be wine. When I asked her about it, she smiled and shrugged, saying it must have happened at one of the events she'd planned. Occupational hazard, she joked, but the words felt hollow. It was a Wednesday evening when I received the call that shifted everything. I had just put Ella and Sadie to bed and was settling into my office when my phone buzzed. The number wasn't familiar, but I answered, assuming it was work-related. "Hey, I thought you should know something about Vanessa." The voice was male, deep, and cautious, as though the speaker wasn't entirely sure he should be saying anything at all. "Who is this?" I asked, but he avoided the question. Instead, he told me he'd been at a private club downtown the previous weekend and had seen my wife there. "She wasn't alone," he added after a pause. I gripped the phone tighter, my heart pounding. "Who are you? What are you talking about?" He hesitated, then said he had been hesitant to call but felt I deserved to know. He mentioned Lila, too, that the 2 women frequented the club together. He apologized for getting involved and hung up before I could press further. I sat there in the dim light of my office, the words ringing in my ears. Vanessa at a private club? With someone else? The claim felt absurd. Vanessa was a planner, a perfectionist, the most grounded person I knew. I decided not to tell her about the call. Instead, I kept my eyes open, watching for anything that might confirm or disprove what I had heard. A few days later, I came home early from work. Vanessa's car was gone, and the house was quiet. I walked into the kitchen to grab a drink and noticed her planner lying open on the counter. She was fiercely protective of her schedule, always keeping it with her, but she must have forgotten it in her rush. Curiosity got the better of me. I flipped through the pages, scanning the neat handwriting that detailed appointments and meetings. Everything seemed normal until I spotted something odd. Several entries were marked with a simple P, written in the same shorthand she used for work-related notes. There were no details, just the letter and a time slot. I couldn't make sense of it, but the repetition stood out. It appeared every Friday night for the past 2 months. I took a photo of the page, unsure of what I was looking at but unwilling to let it go. That Friday, Vanessa mentioned a late meeting with a client. Her tone was casual, and she kissed me on the cheek as she left. I watched her drive off, the taillights disappearing into the evening. For the first time, I didn't trust her. Instead of staying home, I drove downtown, my mind racing. I didn't know where to start, but something about the cryptic phone call and those P entries in her planner pulled me toward the private club the caller had mentioned. The place was easy to spot. Neon lights cast a sultry glow across the sidewalk, and a small crowd lingered near the entrance. I parked across the street, unsure of what I hoped or feared to find. After a while, a familiar figure emerged from the club. It wasn't Vanessa. It was Lila. She was laughing with a man I didn't recognize, her arm draped casually over his shoulder. They looked carefree, but the sight filled me with dread. If Lila was here, then Vanessa. I didn't have time to finish the thought. As I scanned the crowd again, I saw her. Vanessa. She stepped out of the club, her hair slightly disheveled, her dress shimmering under the streetlights. A man followed close behind, his hand brushing against the small of her back. I couldn't breathe. They laughed as they walked toward a waiting car, oblivious to the world around them. I stayed frozen in my seat, my mind a blur of disbelief and anger. Whatever I had been trying to deny was undeniable now. I sat in the car for what felt like hours after Vanessa and the man disappeared into the night. My chest tightened with every passing minute, the cold realization settling over me like a suffocating weight. I wasn't ready to confront her, not yet. If I charged in now, armed with nothing but what I'd seen from a distance, she could twist it, turn it into a misunderstanding, a coincidence. I needed proof. The following morning, Vanessa was in the kitchen, having an easy and calm demeanor. I watched her from the doorway, every movement a cruel reminder of the image she had cultivated, the person I had loved and trusted for years. I decided to play along. When she asked about my plans for the day, I told her I'd be working late, pretending that life was moving forward as it always had. But behind my calm exterior, I was planning my next move. I needed help. Reaching out to Ashley, my colleague and someone I trusted implicitly, wasn't easy. I framed it as a favor, asking if she could help me with a small investigation into something personal. I didn't give her all the details, only that I needed information about Vanessa's supposed meetings and whether they matched her actual movements. Ashley was sharp and resourceful, the kind of person who could find answers where others saw dead ends. Over the next few days, Ashley quietly gathered details. She discovered that Vanessa's client meetings didn't align with her work calendar. In fact, there were no records of her attending these so-called appointments at all. Then came the confirmation that sent a chill down my spine. Ashley found a photo of Vanessa with the same man I had seen outside the club. The picture, taken at a boutique hotel downtown, showed them entering together, their body language unmistakably personal. When Ashley showed me the photo, my heart sank. It was irrefutable proof that Vanessa had lied to me, not just once but repeatedly. I knew it wasn't enough, though. If I confronted her with the photo alone, she'd find a way to dismiss it. I needed something undeniable, something that would leave her with no room for excuses. So, I followed her. The next time Vanessa said she had a late meeting, I made sure to leave work early. I parked a block away from our house and waited. When she left, I stayed far enough behind to avoid suspicion, but close enough to track her movements. She drove downtown again, but this time, she didn't go to the club. Instead, she stopped at the same boutique hotel Ashley had mentioned. My hands tightened on the steering wheel as I watched her step out of the car, her expression calm and deliberate. I didn't follow her inside. Instead, I parked nearby and waited. Time crawled by, each minute stretching endlessly as I replayed every moment of our marriage, every lie she had told me. Eventually, the man appeared. He walked confidently into the hotel, his presence unmistakable. I felt a surge of anger rise within me, but I forced myself to stay put. My plan wasn't to confront him, not yet. As I waited in the dark, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about Vanessa's betrayal. It was about uncovering the full scope of her deceit, no matter how painful it might be. The truth was close, so close I could almost touch it. The truth felt closer than ever, but something inside me whispered to tread carefully. I couldn't just wait and watch anymore. I needed to push the boundaries, to uncover what Vanessa had buried so deeply. Yet I wasn't prepared for how the search for answers would lead to something darker than I had imagined. After the hotel incident, I knew her secrets weren't confined to stolen glances or late-night meetings. Her lies were threads in a web that stretched further than I had anticipated, and I was determined to pull every strand until the whole thing unraveled. The first clue came unexpectedly. While sorting through the mail one morning, I noticed an envelope addressed to Vanessa, marked confidential. It was from a luxury spa, one she had never mentioned visiting. Out of sheer curiosity, I opened it. Inside was a receipt for a 3-day stay, complete with a detailed itinerary. Couples massages, private suites, champagne brunches. I felt my chest tighten. Vanessa had claimed to be at a weekend charity retreat during those exact dates. Instead of confronting her outright, I decided to call the spa. With a bit of charm and persistence, I managed to confirm her stay. The receptionist even mentioned her plus one, a Mr. David Callahan. The name was unfamiliar, but I couldn't ignore the familiarity in the tone of the receptionist's voice, as if Vanessa and David had been regulars. Later that day, as I mulled over the discovery, another unexpected opportunity fell into my lap. Ashley, the friend I trusted to help dig into Vanessa's alibis, texted me a photo. It was a candid shot taken at a recent gala Vanessa had attended, a night she'd insisted was strictly business. There she was, standing with a small group, her radiant smile lighting up the frame. But standing just behind her, leaning in slightly as if sharing a private joke, was the same man I'd seen outside the club and mentioned on the spa receipt. David. What struck me wasn't just their proximity but the way her body angled toward his, a subtle intimacy that sent a chill down my spine. That evening, Vanessa came home late again, her perfume lingering like a taunt. I watched her move around the kitchen, her demeanor unchanged, her laughter with the girls effortless. How could someone who had built a life with me lie so seamlessly? But there was one more layer to this puzzle, something I hadn't anticipated. The following day, as I was scrolling through old photos on my phone, searching for a picture of Ella's science project, I stumbled across a video from our anniversary dinner 6 months ago. It was one of those moments I'd nearly forgotten about, Vanessa laughing as Ella filmed us blowing out candles on a cake. In the background, I spotted him. David. He was seated at a table just a few feet away, his eyes flicking toward Vanessa more than once. My heart pounded as I realized he hadn't just entered her life recently. He'd been circling us for months, possibly longer. Desperate for more, I texted Ashley and asked if she could find anything else on David Callahan. Her response came quickly, and it felt like a punch to the gut. David is Lila's ex. The revelation hit harder than I expected. Lila had brought him into our orbit. She had been at every gathering, every event, casually weaving her presence into our lives. Had she known about Vanessa and David? Or worse, had she encouraged it? The scope of betrayal felt larger now, as though Vanessa hadn't just betrayed me but had weaponized her friendships and our trust to hide her actions. I decided that night to stop being passive. If Vanessa was going to keep secrets, I would expose them, no matter how much it hurt. But as I planned my next move, a part of me couldn't shake the feeling that what I had uncovered so far was only the beginning. Vanessa had spent months weaving a tapestry of lies, each thread carefully chosen to keep me in the dark. But now, with every scrap of evidence I uncovered, her web began to fray. I decided it was time to stop playing detective from the shadows and take control. Catching her red-handed would leave no room for manipulation or excuses. I needed to set the stage carefully, ensuring that the truth would reveal itself in a way she couldn't deny. The first step was to track her movements. Vanessa had a pattern: regular outings she labeled as work obligations or charity events. I started by discreetly checking her planner when she wasn't home. Her upcoming week was packed with meetings, one of which aligned suspiciously with the pattern I'd noticed before. Friday night, an entry labeled simply event planning. I knew better than to rely on just a hunch. That evening, I reached out to Ashley again, asking if she could keep an eye on Vanessa at her supposed event. Ashley was hesitant, but ultimately agreed. She promised to attend the gala Vanessa had mentioned and report back. Meanwhile, I took matters into my own hands. The next day, I borrowed a small GPS tracker from a colleague, explaining that I wanted to monitor some deliveries for work. It was a half-truth, but it served its purpose. Late that night, I attached the device to Vanessa's car, securing it discreetly under the bumper. It felt like a violation of her privacy, but the lies she had spun had already destroyed the trust between us. Friday arrived, and Vanessa seemed unusually cheerful as she got ready. She wore a sleek black dress, one I hadn't seen before, and spent more time than usual on her makeup. I played my part, acting as though her night out was just another routine engagement. When she left, I waited a few minutes before checking the GPS. Sure enough, the blinking dot on my screen showed her heading downtown, but not toward the venue she had mentioned. Instead, her car stopped near the boutique hotel Ashley had identified. I followed at a safe distance, parking on a side street where I could keep an eye on the entrance. My pulse raced as I watched her walk inside, her heels clicking against the pavement with a confidence that both enraged and fascinated me. It wasn't long before David appeared, his casual arrogance on full display as he greeted her just inside the lobby. They didn't linger, heading straight for the elevator bank. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. This wasn't the moment to act, not yet. I texted Ashley, updating her on what I'd seen. She responded quickly, suggesting we use a private investigator she knew, a retired cop who specialized in cases like this. Within an hour, the investigator was on site, his camera ready to document whatever unfolded. I sat in my car, watching the hotel entrance and waiting for updates. The minutes felt like hours, each one stretching longer than the last. My phone buzzed periodically with messages from the investigator. They're in a suite on the 6th floor. No signs of leaving yet. Caught them through the window. Got everything. I clenched my fists, the reality of what I'd orchestrated sinking in. There was no going back now. After what felt like an eternity, Vanessa and David emerged. Their expressions relaxed, their movements unhurried. They parted ways outside the hotel, each disappearing into the night as though nothing had happened. The investigator handed me a folder the next morning, the contents too damning to ignore. Photos of Vanessa and David embracing, their gestures speaking louder than any words. Now, armed with irrefutable proof, I had the leverage I needed to confront her. The photos sat on the table like a loaded weapon, their presence suffocating the room. I stared at them, trying to keep my emotions steady, but the betrayal etched in those images threatened to consume me. Vanessa and David, their closeness undeniable, their smiles a mockery of everything I thought we had. For the next few days, I carried the weight of those pictures in silence. I went through the motions, work, errands, and the mundane rhythm of daily life, while Vanessa moved through the house like nothing had changed. Her laughter echoed down the hallways, grating against my nerves like nails on a chalkboard. She had no idea what was coming. I chose Sunday evening. The girls were at a sleepover, the house was quiet, and there was no escape for her this time. Vanessa was in the kitchen chopping vegetables for dinner, humming a tune as though she hadn't just torn our lives apart. I stepped into the room, the folder clutched tightly in my hand, and placed it on the counter. The sound of it hitting the surface made her pause mid-chop. She glanced at the folder, then at me, her brow furrowing. She asked me what it was, her tone sharp and annoyed, as though I disrupted her routine. I flipped the folder open, revealing the damning photographs. She froze, her eyes scanning the images. But instead of the guilt or regret I expected, her expression shifted into something colder. Vanessa straightened and crossed her arms over her chest, accusing me of spying on her with a voice laced with disdain. Her reaction stunned me. There were no tears, no apologies, no frantic attempts to explain. Just defiance, as though I was the one at fault for uncovering the truth. I told her I knew everything. The hotel, the lies, the man she had so effortlessly welcomed into our lives. She didn't flinch. Vanessa snapped, her voice sharp and biting as she lashed out. She demanded to know what I wanted her to say. If I expected an apology or an empty assurance that it didn't mean anything. She scoffed, shaking her head with a bitter edge, and threw out the cruelest words yet, accusing me of not being enough and telling me to grow up. Her words hit like a sledgehammer, each one designed to inflict maximum damage. The anger that had simmered beneath the surface erupted. I demanded to know how long it had been going on, how she could destroy everything we'd built together. Vanessa rolled her eyes and brushed past me, her indifference stinging more than her words. She spoke with venom, claiming that David had given her something I never could. Her voice was cold as she listed it off: excitement, attention, and a life that, in her eyes, wasn't so unbearably dull. I stood there, stunned, as she poured herself a glass of wine and took a casual sip. It was as if my pain was a nuisance, an inconvenience interrupting her evening. She didn't stop. Her words became crueler, mocking me for trusting her, for being so predictable. She accused me of being too focused on work, too boring, too blind to notice her dissatisfaction until it was shoved in my face. Her coldness burned hotter than any tears could have. She wasn't sorry. She didn't care about the destruction she'd caused. As her tirade continued, I felt a strange clarity settle over me. This wasn't the woman I thought I knew, the partner I had believed in for so many years. She had made her choices, and now she was showing me exactly who she was. When she finally stopped talking, I picked up the folder and turned to leave. As I turned to leave, I heard her call after me, her tone still dripping with indifference, asking where I was going. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The decision was already made. I drove aimlessly for what felt like hours, the city lights blurring into streaks as my thoughts raced. Her words echoed in my mind, each one sharper than the last. Vanessa hadn't just betrayed me. She had shown no remorse, no regret, no acknowledgement of the life she had destroyed. When I finally pulled into the driveway, the house was dark. I entered quietly, moving through the familiar space that now felt foreign. Vanessa was asleep, or pretending to be. Either way, I didn't care. The next morning, I made my decision. Over coffee, I laid it out plainly. There was no yelling, no theatrics, just a calm, measured explanation of what would happen next. I told her I was leaving, that our marriage was over, and that I would be contacting a lawyer to begin the divorce process. Vanessa stared at me, her expression unreadable. For a moment, I thought she might try to argue, to manipulate me into staying. Instead, she shrugged. She responded with a flat tone, saying it was fine and that I should do whatever I wanted. Her indifference stung, but it also confirmed that I was making the right choice. I packed my things over the next few days, taking only what I needed. The house, once a place filled with warmth and laughter, felt cold now, its walls echoing with silence. The girls stayed with Vanessa for the time being, a temporary arrangement until we could figure out custody. I moved into a small apartment across town, a modest space that felt like freedom. The first night there, I sat on the couch and let the weight of everything hit me. The betrayal, the anger, the sadness. It all came crashing down at once. Vanessa wasted no time flaunting her new relationship. David was at the house frequently, his presence a reminder of everything she had traded our life for. It hurt, but it also steeled my resolve. I focused on rebuilding. My work became an anchor, a place where I could lose myself in numbers and logic. Friends and family rallied around me, their support a lifeline during the darkest days. The divorce was finalized quickly, Vanessa's indifference expediting the process. I walked away with little more than my dignity, but it was enough. In the months that followed, I began to find pieces of myself again. I reconnected with old friends, took up hobbies I'd long forgotten, and spent as much time with Ella and Sadie as I could. They were my reason to keep moving forward, my proof that there was still good in the world despite the pain. Vanessa, on the other hand, seemed to thrive in her new life, or at least she pretended to, but I knew better. The emptiness in her eyes whenever we exchanged the girls told me all I needed to know. One evening, as I tucked Sadie into bed during my weekend with them, she asked me if I was happy. The question caught me off guard, but I smiled and told her the truth. I'm getting there.